it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Well, look at this. We've got a new trooper just revealed at StarWars.com. And just in time for San Diego Comic-Con 2019 coming up next week. The Sith Trooper. But is it new? I don't know. I feel like I've heard of this before. I think there is some prior art, at least in the name. Going back to Knights of the Old Republic, I think. But we'll be covering that up here a little later on in the program right here this week's show, Rebel Force Radio for Friday, July 12th, 2019. Away we go. What a show we've got for you, including coming up later in the program, a great interview. Really, really interesting stuff from a fellow podcaster, Mark Ramsey. Mark released Inside Star Wars, a really incredible 8-part audio dramatization of the history of the making of our favorite movie, the original Star Wars movie, back in 1977. And if you haven't been exposed to this type of audio experience, you are really in for a treat. So we're going to be talking to Mark later on and talk about how the project evolved and was released. And if you think you've heard it all when it comes to behind the scenes of Star Wars, you haven't, because this has got a lot to offer. So we'll be doing that. Also, as I mentioned, the news of a Sith Trooper has finally been announced. I guess it was leaked, but they was like, we might as well go with it. It was leaked. Let's just, we'll roll with this one. Also, some highlights from Daisy Ridley. She was recently interviewed by MTV's Josh Horowitz and revealed some interesting tidbits about Episode 9. So, great stuff coming your way. But, of course, I am not alone. With me, as always, my good friend and yours from Chicago, Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to going in the cantina with Mark Ramsey, because his show Inside Star Wars it's just great. It's kind of like if you can make a podcast into a movie without pictures. That's what Inside Star Wars is. It's really amazing. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to check out some of his other stuff. Inside Psycho, Inside The Exorcist, and Inside Jaws, which was a really popular show for him last year. But Inside Star Wars, all about George Lucas and the people around him who made Star Wars possible. And it does touch into the prequel era a little bit and takes you all the way up until the sequel era as well. And it's a really effective show. So that's Inside Star Wars. We actually have a little clip here from it that I want to play for you guys, because it sort of gives you an idea of what this show's all about. This is kind of how Mark Hamill became aware of the auditions for Star Wars, as told by Inside Star Wars.
You know, Mark, there's a part in Star Wars that's perfect for you. What's up, man? I just did the pilot for a TV series. 8 is enough. 8 is enough. Mark, you really want to be Dick Van Patten's bitch? Hey. It's TV, Robert. It's steady. Mark, what's the matter with you? This is a movie, and it's George Lucas, and the part is perfect for you. What's the role? Earnest, teenaged farm boy. In outer space? Hey, it's a job. Practice your Midwestern accent. Mark Hamill did practice his Midwestern accent, and it didn't take him long to realize he wouldn't need it. But first, he had an audition to make. He cleaned himself up and combed his hair. He straightened the pillows on his host's couch, the only decent piece of furniture in Robert's small living room. Hey, Mark, break a leg. It was the best advice one actor could offer another. And the good fortune would not be Mark Hamill's alone, because a few years later, Hamill's host, Robert, would nail an audition of his own. It was the title role in Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street, and Robert Englund would become Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, two icons.
Right, small world.
Sleeping on the same couch.
Yeah, I love stories like that where you hear about a couple of guys and they're just really scuffling to try to make a career happen. Now, Mark definitely was on an upswing because he did get that role in 8 is Enough. I think he was going to play David Bradford on that show.
The eldest brother.
Yeah, I think that was David, if I remember correctly. I haven't seen 8 is Enough in like 40 years. But Mark, I think, got that role. And if memory serves correct, he got sued from the 8 is Enough production company or ABC or someone who was connected to that production. He got sued because he bailed on them to go do Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, so he only shows up in the pilot episode.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then another actor was hired as David, a guy with dark hair too. So it's like, we're not going to notice. But
so he wasn't Dick Van Patten's bitch for long.
No, according to Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund, no way. So of course, listening to this episode of Inside Star Wars, I immediately remembered we had a conversation with Robert about Star Wars, and there was some misinformation floating around out on the web about his audition and everything. So he was really excited to talk to us to set the record straight. And you can hear that interview now if you subscribe to RFR on YouTube. And, we got all kind of things going on YouTube. Highlights from past shows. There's RFR TV, which brings you videos. Like Puppet Lando goes to Rancho Obi-Wan, and When the Galaxy Listens, the RFR documentary series from filmmaker Sheldon Norton. And if you think you've seen When the Galaxy Listens, think again, because the director's cut is out there, and it's got a ton of new material, stuff with Dave Filoni, stuff at Skywalker Ranch. You're going to love it. Check it out, When the Galaxy Listens. There's just so much happening on our YouTube channel, and I do have In the Cantina interviews in a playlist of its own. And that's where you'll find our conversation with Robert Englund, setting the Star Wars record straight, talking to me and Jason about Freddy Krueger influencing Mark Hamill to go try out to be the earnest farm boy from space. So that's pretty cool. And
if Luke Skywalker was going to have a roommate or was going to be crashing on somebody's couch, they didn't live together. It was just they were friends, and I think Mark would stay there from time to time. But if you're thinking about Luke Skywalker's pal, Freddy Krueger would not be the first name that comes to mind.
No, I mean, that's a very dark side presence for, the young moisture farmer to be running with. So I think his fall to the dark side would have been imminent. Yeah. Should he be palling around in the furnace room with Freddy Krueger? It's like, how hot can Tatooine get?
Right. Well, now, if you thought Fixer was a bad influence.
The Fixer.
Nothing compared to Freddy. Jeez.
He's scraping the moisture evaporators with his clawed blades. Scream! Oh, can you imagine the Jawas? How about a Jawa encounter with Freddy Krueger? They're just cruising through the sand dunes and, maybe hanging around Beggar's Canyon, and all of a sudden Freddy appears outside the sand crawler and does that thing with the claw against the sand crawler, and all the Jawas start freaking out, and they try to blast him, and he just starts slicing them up. Oh my God, that would be thrilling. And I wonder what that would sound like.
Come to Freddy.
That would be the greatest crossover of all time. And of course, Anakin is the one having the dreams. So
of course,
Hayden,
that's perfect.
Hayden wakes up, he's topless,
right? Sweaty.
Sweaty. Yeah. What have I done? It was like, he ate that burrito right before he went to bed. Bad idea.
Oh man. Well, you know what's a good idea? You know what a good idea is?
What?
Puffer Pig.
Puffa Pig in this episode. And, of course, thanks to David Sparks, Max Sparky, who sent us some gifts from Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And he sent me a puffer pig, and not just any puffer pig, one that makes sounds. And I've been having a lot of fun with puffer pig. I have to control myself to keep him from intervening in the show because, I mean, he's here with me in the studio, and at any time you might get some puffer pig commentary.
See, that thing sounds almost human. I mean, it is really...
You can be bassy with him, or you could, like, hit the higher register. So thanks again to Max Sparky for sending. I think I'm going to be going out to Anaheim to visit Galaxy's Edge in a couple of weeks. And I think me and Max Sparky are going to hook up there for some drinks at Olga's Cantina. So I'm really looking forward to that. Our friend Jeff Ulisny sent us an email at show@rebelforceradio.com. And I guess when we were having a big... hysterical moment when Puffer Pig showed up at the studio. Somebody must have said that they wanted a Puffer Pig theme that we could play on the show.
Yeah, and, I think that was Billy Mack.
It was Billy said that. So Jeff writes us, careful what you wish for. He says, I actually had 2 different ideas, but decided to record only one. The other was based on the Beatles' Piggies. But Jeff thinks I'm much more of a Black Sabbath kind of guy. So War Pigs was the song that Jeff chose. And it's a shorty, but check it out. Here it is, the Puffer Pig theme, making its world premiere on Rebel Force Radio.
Jimmy Mac begins the squeezing, and the Puffer Pig starts wheezing. Snorts and oinks will fill the show. Now on Rebel Force Radio. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
Amazing.
I love it.
Jeff Ulisny. So I love it, but it seems like there's something missing from it. So maybe you could play it one more time. And I'll give it a little Puffer Pig enhancement.
All right, here we go. Special edition coming up.
Jimmy Mac begins the squeezing, and the Puffer Pig starts wheezing. Snorts and oinks will fill the show. Now on Rebel Force Radio. Oh,
Not bad. Not bad.
It's great.
We'll have to work on that. Unfortunately, Black Sabbath, they wrapped up their touring career with their final concerts last year. But I think if they knew that the Puffer Pig is available to offer backing vocals on War Pigs, they might consider one more world tour. Go out there with Puffer Pig and Black Sabbath and Ozzy. Could you see Ozzy and the Puffer Pig having a meeting on stage? He'd probably try to bite the head off of Puffer Pig.
That's what I was thinking. He'd just rip right into it.
But maybe, we could say, no, Ozzy, he's a member of the band now. And then Ozzy might get it. But we'd probably have to take several Puffer Pigs with us out on tour, just in case Ozzy gets a little interested in some beheadings. Thank you, Max Sparky, for the Puffer Pig. Thank you, Jeff Ulisny, for the Puffer Pig theme. I really appreciate it. I just am in Puffer Pig heaven right now. Puffer Pig in this episode. So I want to keep things on kind of a musical flow here right now. Listening to Daisy Ridley rap last week.
Yes. Wasn't that something?
She showed up on the I wasn't expecting it. And she showed up on the Tonight Show and rapped a few verses from Lady Marmalade, the version from the movie. Who did that? I think it was Christina Aguilera. I can't remember. But so she rapped, and so let's hear that again.
Daisy Ridley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We come through with the money and the garter belts. Let them know we bout that cake straight out the gate. We independent women, some mistakes for hearts. I'm saying, why spend mine when I can stand yours? Disagree freak, well that's you and I'm sorry. I could keep playing these cats out like Atari. High heel shoes, getting love for the Jews, for the badass chicks, for the Moulin Rouge.
You just do that.
That was Puffa Pig. So that's Daisy.
Now, when I hear that, when I hear Daisy Ridley rapping, I immediately think about, she could be in like a film version of Hamilton. I could see her being like Eliza Schuyler.
She's got some skills there. No question
I
about
could
it.
see her doing that.
She sounded pretty good right there. I mean, maybe that's the only song she can do, but who knows? We'll have to see. We'll follow her career with great interest. But it got me thinking about Star Wars and hip-hop and looking back through history, and I came up with a couple of other good examples of Star Wars actors doing a little rapping. And the first one is from C-3PO himself, Anthony Daniels. Of course, in character as C-3PO, so you get the added bonus there. Not only is the Star Wars actor rapping, but he's going to rap in character. And this goes back to, I'd say the early days of rap and hip-hop, right when it was starting to really start exploding into a medium to be reckoned with, was in the mid-'80s. And during that time, Star Tours opened at Disney. And to celebrate the opening of the new ride at Disney, back in 1986, ABC ran a Star Tours TV special featuring Anthony Daniels as C-3PO and, oddly enough, Buck Rogers actor Gil Gerard.
Oh, Gil!
Gil's in it. And,
That's fantastic.
Gil's the type of guy who looks out of place and right at home at the same time. Somehow he manages to do that, So good for Gil. And the TV special, it's really more of an infomercial than a TV special. You could see it on YouTube. Look for George Lucas's Star Tours TV special. But here's Anthony in character getting down with a beat.
Hit it, R2. My name, is C-3PO. Rapping about space, the new place to go. You can eat all you want and you won't gain a pound because there isn't any weight here like back on the ground. We travel very fast near the speed of light. You can leave in the morning and get home last night. His name is R2, but you'll never hear him rap. His inventor forgot to give him lips that flap. He'll greet you all and turn on his charms. He'd give you a hug if he had some arms. There's no gravity when you're out in space. It doesn't pull you down or hold you in place. You can run real fast, your feet will fly. You'll be so light, you can jump sky high. New worlds open up when you're out that far, and all you've got to do is wish upon a star.
Huh?
Wow.
Did you ever hear that before?
Man, no, I had no idea that C-3PO was on the forefront of the hip-hop movement back in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, no, he did actually turn down an official offer to join NWA. Yeah.
NWA 3PO.
Yeah.
That was the original name of the group.
Yes. But he turned them down. He felt like he didn't really fit in with the guys. But so there's Anthony Daniels, C-3PO, doing his hip-hop thing. But there's one more. I couldn't ever do a retrospective on Star Wars hip-hop without featuring our favorite, Billy D. Williams. The man himself showed up in 1991's Agent 00 Soul. You've heard us talk about it.
This is a classic.
Before here on the show, and here's the actual theme to Agent 00 Soul, featuring the hip-hop talents of rapper BDW, Billy D. Williams.
Look out. Yo, down with my mind, Coach 00 Soul. One of a kind, and I'm in control. Without a doubt, I get the job done, catching bad guys on the run.
Yeah.
Brown, James Brown. Look out. Yo.
Ooh, this is one of those featuring tracks. Who's it featuring?
Yeah.
Cy Snoodles, actually.
Get my man. Brown. Krueger.
All right, I got to tell you, if this was a contest, I think Daisy Ridley would win.
Yeah, really.
I mean, nothing against BDW and 00 Soul, or 3PO for that matter.
Right.
But man, when it comes to rap with an R,
yeah,
Daisy Ridley.
She's got
that
it.
R stands for Ridley.
She's got what it takes. Now, if the three of them could get together and somehow collaborate,
oh man,
I think that would blow the roof off the place. So,
well, you got to think, they were all in episode 9. I'm sure that during the downtime there on set, you never know what might have happened.
No, you never know. And they could take it on the road, too. It would be a great promotional tie-in for the release of episode 9. Like, Daisy, Anthony, and Billy D at Lollapalooza. Why not? I mean, that's what you call outside-the-box marketing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Billy D could have the cane and the ascot that he's been sporting lately. Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Looking good.
Looking good. All right. So, are we going to do the investigative report?
Well, I think I would like to at least open the file. Let's just say, let's open this file.
We got a call for an investigative report.
Yes. Oh, no, that's right, Jason.
That's you. Yeah.
That is me. It's been a while since we've done one of these. Yeah. Once again, thank you, Jason. I am Jimmy Mack from the Rebel Force Radio Investigative Report team. And, we're opening up a new file. Our last investigative report is kind of a cold case file at this point. We were trying to discover what the new Wilhelm scream is. And we were following clues and trying to put together a lead and figure it out. But we're getting conflicting information from these little coy, offhand comments that get made from people at Skywalker Sound. Looking at you, Matt Wood.
Yeah, they're trying to throw us off the trail.
Yeah, there's not been a commitment to it. And so, I started thinking about it. It's like, no, there is no new Wilhelm scream. There can never be a replacement for the Wilhelm scream. The Wilhelm scream is the Wilhelm scream. And there will never be another contender, except no substitutes. Let me just say that. So I kind of gave up on that whole thing. But again, we can always reopen that investigation as more evidence pours in. Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm not giving up. But we do have a new investigative report I'd like to open up here on this week on Rebel Force Radio. And it comes via an email from Colin, who was recently on a trip to Disneyland to visit Galaxy's Edge. He lives in the UK. Just recently, Jason, they opened up Galaxy's Edge to the public. That's right. Without reservations, okay? You needed a reservation for the first month or so. Yep. The park was open, and now it's wide open, and anyone could walk into it every day. And Colin made this observation about Disneyland in general. He visited the Star Tours attraction in Tomorrowland, which has been there for a number of years, decades. And
since 1986 in C-3PO's rap.
There you go. So he went to visit it on June 23rd, and that was before the reservation period had ended for Galaxy's Edge. Mm-hmm. So he visited Star Tours on the 23rd and had an original trilogy experience with appearances by Darth Vader, Boba Fett, etc. And
this is on Star Tours.
This is on Star Tours.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
And so then he went back to Disneyland a few days later after the reservation period for Galaxy's Edge had ended. And he noted some differences on Star Tours. He noticed that on each Star Tours journey, the ride was in the Batuu era. Every ride had Finn, Poe, no appearances from Leia, Vader, Akbar, etc. And each ride finished with a safe landing on Batuu after avoiding Kylo Ren in the First Order. And so he thinks that there has been a change, a switch has been flipped on Star Tours to only focus on the prequel trilogy era in an attempt to tie in, or I'm sorry, in the sequel trilogy era to tie into the Galaxy's Edge experience. And now, there's been a lot of people wringing their hands over Galaxy's Edge because it doesn't feature classic recreations of Star Wars environments like the Cantina on Mos Eisley, Jabba's dungeon, I don't know, the
Dagobah,
base,
Hoth,
Dagobah,
whatever,
all that
right,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
Right. Hard to get Hoth in California or Florida.
Well, you never know. But, I mean, a lot of people are saying that that the Galaxy's Edge fails to acknowledge the original trilogy or anything outside of the sequel trilogy. And that is true to a degree, but there is that Millennium Falcon that's sitting in the middle of the place, which you can board and fly and all this.
Right.
So I think that in itself is really the connecting tissue to all things Star Wars. And
Chewie's there.
Chewie's there, yeah. He's definitely there. I'm not like I said, I'm not making excuses for the fact that there's a lack of original trilogy and prequel trilogy stuff going on at Galaxy's Edge. I kind of would prefer to see a little bit more of that, but when I look at Galaxy's Edge just via photos and videos without actually having set foot there yet, what I see is a distinct Star Wars aesthetic based on Tatooine. It's very derivative of Tatooine. Mos Espa, Mos Eisley. I get that.
Olga's
Cantina could, it's just moisture evaporators. The marketplace kind of has a Mos Espa vibe to it for me, just from looking at the pictures. It's definitely derivative of the Tatooine environment.
There's no question, and I will tell you that speaking of our pal Max Sparky, last Friday he rang me up on FaceTime and gave me a whole tour of Galaxy's Edge over FaceTime. Now, that's not the same thing as being there, obviously, but it was pretty cool. And I will tell you one of the things that jumped out at me and David was pointing out is just how many relics and things there are just laying around that harken back to the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. And it's all sort of put in the guise of, that these are sort of historical artifacts and that sort of thing. But, from the Kowakian monkey lizards all the way to the incredible things hanging out. What's the big Thorian guy?
Doc Ondar.
Doc Ondar. Yeah, Doc Ondar's shop there. It's just chock full of iconic Star Wars saga pieces, memorabilia, but in-universe memorabilia. So there are these reminders everywhere you look that put you in Star Wars. And that's one of the things I loved so much about Force Awakens, was that it was new, but at the same time, there were things around to put you like a downed AT-AT, which still is one of, I just think one of the most inspired things of the sequel trilogy is having Rey living in a downed AT-AT.
That is cool.
I just love it. I just love that there are pieces of the great Civil War laying about. So that's kind of what you see in Galaxy's Edge. I am very curious about this because, Jim, as you recall, the last time Star Tours got a retooling, there was, as George would say, a kind of a whoop-de-doo made out of it.
Well, yeah, but no, there have been updates. There have been.
Even since then?
Yeah, Jakku had been added. Crate had been added. Okay. I don't know if Rogue One or Solo inspired any updates on Star Tours. But I'll definitely find out. I'm going there in a couple of weeks. That's why I find this investigative report so intriguing, is because I'm actually going to have boots on the ground and I can research this stuff. Let me just wrap up Colin's email here with his final paragraph, because it kind of sums it all up. Colin says, I'm an OT guy at heart and thought it was a shame that Disney had seemingly removed all of the original trilogy from Star Tours from June 24th onwards and made it relate back to Galaxy's Edge. It would be nice to have some OT to cling on to in the park somewhere. All that was left was a Vader meet and greet in the launch bay, which was one of the highlights of the trip when he unexpectedly spoke to us about the location of the Rebel base. Oh, you look like a rebel there, Colin. But so Colin feels like the times, they are a-changing, and he believes that there is a gradual removal of original trilogy stuff happening right now. It's happening at the Disney parks. And I'm very curious about that. I was thinking that the balance would have been really nice had Star Tours maintained its original trilogy edge, while Galaxy's Edge was completely immersed in the sequel trilogy part of the timeline, to make it all feel like it's all Galaxy's Edge right now. Could be something that is being methodically done behind the scenes at Disney. And I'm going to investigate this. I'm going to have boots on the ground, and I am going to ride Star Tours so many times. I mean, my face will be green by the end of this.
Gee, I'm so sorry I can't be there.
No. Well, I'll give you full reports, man. I'll give Max Sparky my phone, and I'll say, shoot video of me kind of like trying to walk straight forward after going on Star Tours 20 times.
But all the blue milk from Galaxy's Edge.
Oh,
but here's a story from BuzzFeed News. This was a long one. So if you're looking for a nice long read, it's a very, very interesting piece by Adam B. And the title of the story is How Disney is Devouring Hollywood and May Choke on It. But here's something interesting. It says, so expectations for the Rise of Skywalker's performance are sky high. If I'm sitting over at Disney, I know the Rise of Skywalker better be great, or else people are going to start to not get excited when they see the Lucasfilm logo pop up at the beginning of the trailer. Right now, Star Wars is powered by an intense sense of nostalgia for the people who grew up on Star Wars, but 20 years from now, it'll be entirely relying on what millennials think of Star Wars, and they're wavering. If 20 years seems like an unreasonably long horizon to worry about, consider that Disney reportedly spent $1 billion to build out the Star Wars section of Disneyland, the largest single expansion of the park's history. The company has long relied on its feature film division to be the leading edge of its sprawling entertainment industrial complex, feeding content into its immense merchandising and theme park divisions. But the key word there is popular. If millennial and Gen Z moviegoers stop feeling passionate about Star Wars, why would they spend hundreds of dollars to bring their kids to ride the Millennium Falcon? So here's the idea. Disney is in a very difficult position. Do you continue to stoke the flame and the fire and the passion inside old people like us, or do you try to get the kindling there going for lighting new passion amongst these millennials and Generation Z moviegoers? So if you're going to invest $1 billion into this, are you going to invest in the past, or are you going to invest in the future? And it looks to me like they're trying to have a little bit of both.
Right.
But if I'm really being honest, I think that they're leaning more towards the future. And I know that there is a reaction that sometimes I myself have to sort of face and kind of talk myself out of. I don't think this is coming from a place of hubris in the sense that Disney is saying, well, our films are the definitive Star Wars, and that's what we're going to promote because they're our movies, and that's what we love, and blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's quite that simple. I do think that it is about investing in a new generation or the current generation of Star Wars fans. So 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the kids that are growing up, the people that are growing up with this sequel trilogy will want to take their kids to Disneyland and have them ride the Millennium Falcon because they remember when Rey and Finn got behind the yoke of the Falcon in the cockpit. And, you know, when you look at it that way, it's hard to blame them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you know, all things have to move forward and they have to evolve. And I think Galaxy's Edge offers a bit of flexibility. Should The Mandalorian take off and be a huge success, people might be expecting to see The Mandalorian show up at Galaxy's Edge. And it seems like it provides a universal kind of Star Wars environment where you could drop in some new characters like that. And I also think it's
a
universal.
Canvas,
I
right?
think
it's a canvas.
Yes, and I also think it's universal enough to where you can drop in some original trilogy stuff too. You know, I think this hand-wringing over what timeline and what place in the timeline is being represented in Galaxy's Edge, I think that's a little too over the top. Am I going to be upset if I'm at Star Wars Land and I see Qui-Gon Jinn standing next to Finn? You know, I mean, am I going to like be upset about that, or am I just going to go, "Wow, man, it's all Star Wars, isn't it?" You know, why place yourself in a certain part on the timeline? Yep. You know, at an amusement park, it's fully immersive. If you just, I think, throw in all eras of Star Wars into the stew, it doesn't matter. People are going to be going, "Oh my God, what is Kit Fisto doing here?" I can't wrap my head around Kit Fisto standing here when over there you have a First Order Stormtrooper. Nobody thinks that way. It's just the thrill of being there and being right, seeing all the things from Star Wars.
You know what? I mean, honestly, I totally agree, and I think about now. I know that there, with Galaxy's Edge, that there's a certain desire to be canonical, whatever the term you want to use. But when you think about all of the various costumed characters that show up throughout the Disney parks,
I know,
around the world, they're not worried about timelines. They're not worried about these things. So for me, I wouldn't mind walking through Galaxy's Edge and seeing Vader choking out somebody around this corner, and here comes Rey, you know, flipping around on another, which Rey, by the way, does show up. She's sort of like the chase card, as Jimmy Mack calls me. When you're at Galaxy's Edge, it's a rare sighting, but you will see Rey. I would love to see, in our, again, Max Sparky is just dying to see an Ahsoka Tano showing up in Galaxy's Edge. He says he just wants to look up above the Millennium Falcon in the trees and seeing a crouched Ahsoka Tano with both lightsabers ready to pounce on some First Order scum. So I think it would be really cool to just be smacked in the face every time you turn around with something iconic. That's what I want. I don't care what timeline it's from, but I just want it to just scream Star Wars. And by all accounts, that's exactly what this does. But I wouldn't mind seeing them get a little less precious about worrying about the timeline.
Yeah.
Exactly what you were saying.
You know, yeah, open it up a little bit, for crying out loud. Nobody is that anal. You know?
Star Wars.
Well, what am I talking about? And also, you know what? I might be whistling a different tune after actually visiting the place. So it could have an extremely effective, make an extremely effective mark on my visit if I go there and find that the immersive quality of the experience is at such a point where I might come back saying, "Oh no, there's no way you could expect to see Anakin Skywalker walking around in this place. No way, that would take you out of it, man." I might be talking that way when I get back. We shall see.
We shall see.
have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
Well, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, with San Diego Comic-Con just around the corner, we know that there's going to be news a-breakin', and that's why you tune into Rebel Force Radio. And this week, no exception, the new Sith Trooper, the news just dropped, courtesy of StarWars.com. There's some information on the Star Wars show this week about that. So, the new Sith Trooper, going to be unveiled at San Diego Comic-Con through various exclusive merchandise and a special exhibit that's celebrating the Stormtrooper design. And that's all going to be there at San Diego Comic-Con, July 18th through the 21st. So we're going to have this exhibit with all the trooper armor that spans the Star Wars saga, including this Sith Trooper. Now, if the Sith Trooper name rings a distant bell for you, you probably remember it from the Knights of the Old Republic. There was a Sith Trooper in that game, very different than what we're seeing now. Jim, I would describe this pretty much as maybe a slightly beefed up version of the First Order Trooper, but is all decked out in red. So where there was white, there is now red.
Okay, now which one are you talking about? The KOTOR one or the...
Oh, sorry, I kind of jumped. So not the KOTOR one. The KOTOR one was a much beefier version. It almost looked like the Space Trooper from what was it? Where was the Space Trooper from? Was that wasn't Shadows?
That was in the Thrawn trilogy.
In the Thrawn trilogy, right? But the one that was unveiled today is, as we're recording this, is just, as I say, a red version of a Stormtrooper.
Yeah, looks really cool. Definitely with some Episode 3 Trooper aesthetics, clone Trooper aesthetics. You know, a perfect blend of, I think, Episode 3,
the Mark
clone
II,
Trooper.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of been melded into what we're seeing here with a First Order Trooper and an all red and with some really unique looking armor that's different from any other Stormtrooper we've seen, really. The helmet is the one thing, and of course the belt is there, the classic belt. Got me thinking about these red troopers, though. They've sort of made little appearances here and there over the years. Of course, when you think about red troopers, the first thing I think of is Return of the Jedi and the Imperial Royal Guard that hung out there with Palpatine, you know. And those things were really cool, and they got expanded upon in the Dark Horse series, Crimson Empire, and featuring Kurtz, and he was an Imperial Royal Guard, but they also showed alternate armor that the guards would wear. Training armor, battle armor. The armor we see in Return of the Jedi is more of a ceremonial type of armor that they're wearing. Still battle capable, but they had another version of armor that they wore under the cloaks. And so that's the real red trooper that I could remember. And then in action figures, the Black Series featured a Crimson Trooper. It was just more of your typical traditional original trilogy Stormtrooper, but all red. And it's a great look. I mean, it's a really cool look. Yeah. But that was just action figure only. That didn't even have any tie-in to the comics. In the Phasma novel, there's a character named Cardinal, and he is a First Order Trooper who is in the Crimson armor, but not a Sith Trooper. He looks more like Captain Phasma, but all red, with a cape and all that.
Yeah, right.
But the Sith Troopers, I believe, now here's my take on the Sith Troopers. I haven't really heard anyone talk about it. But what I think is that these troopers are a throwback to an earlier time. And they are protecting maybe the resurrection of Palpatine. They're stationed somewhere where Palpatine's presence will be apparent. Yeah. Whether he's there in the flesh or as a spirit or as something else. Who knows? But I think that their prime duty is to protect the resurrected Palpatine. And again, I don't think that they are necessarily up to speed with current trooper design as much as they're more of a relic from the past, these Sith Troopers.
Well, I got a text from RFR pal Chris Marinan as soon as this news broke, and he wrote, "So, Emperor Palps has a Sith army within the First Order? My mind has been racing with theories." So I don't know. I see where Chris is going with this. So this is, could this be almost like a sleeper cell of, an elite group of Sith Troopers that, almost like Order 66. All of a sudden it's like, oh, you thought Snoke and Kylo Ren were in charge of this whole thing? Right. No, think again. Yeah. He's in charge. And so, I mean, it's a cool theory. I like the idea. I see where you're going as well, that these are troopers that are sort of overseeing or helping to bring about or protecting the resurrection of Palpatine. Where I get hung up is I would expect them, if that was the case, if they were guarding or somehow creating a path for this resurrection of Palpatine, I would expect them to almost look like throwback troopers from the Imperial era.
Well, but they do definitely have, there's aesthetic from the prequel troopers, though. I mean, that is evident.
Yeah, but I feel like they look more like the First Order.
Yeah, with those the cheekbone visor or whatever that is.
Yeah,
that's odd. Yeah,
but Jim, if I'm not mistaken. Now, yes, there's a brief reference, I believe, by Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, but this is the first time we're really hearing the word Sith.
Yeah, this is
thrown around in the sequel trilogy.
Right, first legitimate acknowledgement outside of Luke's history lesson to Rey.
Yeah.
And that's why I am making the connection between this trooper and his duty to protect Palpatine, because Palpatine is the Sith. He really is. I kind of have always believed that when Episode 9 kicks off, I don't know if the First Order is going to be referring to themselves as the First Order. I think the likelihood of that is 50-50. They might call themselves the First Order, or they might reestablish the Empire. On the other side of the coin, I don't think the Resistance is going to be referred to that as such. They will be known out and out as the Rebellion, once again, because they're rebels. The government in power of the galaxy at this point in the timeline is truly the First Order. So they would be the established government. So anything fighting against them would be a rebellion.
Yeah.
And, not in terms of like resistance, but rebellion. So that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I think that it's very likely. We didn't get to see them officially take over as the establishment government of the galaxy far, far away. But when you wipe out, the reigning government, in a massive coup and the destruction of multiple systems, I guess one would assume that you're flexing the muscle and you're now the one in charge, particularly the fact that the Resistance was down to, how many ships?
One.
Just a couple? One ship.
The Falcon.
Yeah.
And there was like 10 people on board it.
Right. So it's all very interesting. We'll see how it plays out. We'll continue to bring you the rumors, but there is a bevy of merchandise. So in addition to this really cool exhibit of the sort of the evolution history of the Stormtrooper, there's everything from high-end Hot Toys 12-inch figures to a new Black Series figure to the Tiki mugs, the geeky tiki.
When did this happen?
Some cool T-shirts.
When did this tiki mug Star Wars thing happen? When did this happen? Don't
be throwing shade on the tiki culture.
Well, I'm not throwing shade on anyone's culture, but just when did this happen? It was, at Star Wars Celebration, it was like, oh, there's a panel about Tiki Star Wars. Oh, there's merchandise, Tiki Star Wars merchandise. Look, there's an exhibit about it. When did this happen? I missed the memo on this.
Yeah, it did seem to spring up out of nowhere. I love Tiki culture.
Oh, I can go Polynesian like crazy.
Well, I'm talking about like the whole, space age jet set swinging 60s. Music and culture that inform the tiki. I love that stuff. I'm with you though. Like this thing sprung out of nowhere, and I'm feeling a little left out because I would have liked to have gotten in on some of these. But I'll tell you the coolest one so far that I have seen is and of all the characters that lend themselves to sort of a tiki vibe, that Lando tiki mug is pretty sweet. Gotta say, I'm digging it, man.
All
Anyway,
right,
I can see partying in the tiki hut.
So we'll be enjoying some blue pina coladas, I'm sure.
Right.
At a convention near you.
Now, we won't be at San Diego Comic-Con, but a good friend of ours will be, and that good friend is Steve Sansweet. He is doing a panel on Saturday. That's July 20th in room 4 from 3 to 4. And this is a story that, for a guy that's written a lot of books, this is a story that I myself really want to hear. And that is how he went from being a reporter and editor at the Wall Street Journal to what George Lucas called the ultimate fan. Mm-hmm. And then really became the face for fans, the face of Lucasfilm, the face of the Star Wars saga from 1996 all the way till 2011. Now, of course, he's the grand poobah and proprietor and main guy there at Rancho Obi-Wan. That's the nonprofit museum that has the world's largest collection of Star Wars memorabilia. I mean, Steve Sansweet needs no introduction. But, Jim, this is a story that he if you ask him about it, he'll tell you about it. But it's really a fascinating tale.
Yeah, and I'm sure having it presented over the course of an hour in a panel discussion is going to be really a very cool experience. I asked Steve about this. He did say that there could be some video made available of this panel somewhere, so we'll be keeping our eyes open for that. But Steve Sansweet, it's a really amazing story, and he's a really amazing guy. So if you find yourself at San Diego Comic-Con on Saturday the 20th, pop into room 4 and tell Steve we sent you, because you're going to be hearing a great story. I mean, really, and he's just such a wonderful guy, and he's so warm and generous with his time. And when Lucasfilm had Steve in the position of director of fan relations for 15 years, I think as Star Wars fans, as the fan base, we felt like really connected to Lucasfilm during those years. We felt like Lucasfilm really gave a damn about Star Wars fans and wanted to know what we think and what we felt. And I'll be honest with you, I don't feel that from Lucasfilm at all anymore. At all. There seems to be a cultivation of division.
Steve led by example. And,
yes.
And so you kind of, as a fan, you wanted to be like Steve. You wanted to be calm, collected, glib from time to time, of course, but above all, passionate. Mm-hmm. And that was the image of the Star Wars fan that we aspired to be, that Steve kind of established. And without that sort of figurehead there, and I don't think that was the purpose in putting Steve in a position like that, but that was some collateral benefit. Was we all had a leader that we wanted to sort of emulate, to make proud, to impress, and we don't have that right now. There's there's, it was like, as a fan, it was like, well, of course, you had George Lucas, right? I mean, he was the guy. And then you had Steve. And I'm kind of with you in that it just feels sort of fractured and impersonal and just more corporate than it ever did before.
He was truly a unifying force.
Yes.
Within Star Wars. Officially within the brand. We felt like he represented all of us. And he carried himself in that position in such a way that you really believed that he was representing us. And I have so many stories about how many times I've had to, share excitement with him, all the way to crying on his shoulder. I mean, all across the entire spectrum. And he's just been one of the most amazing presences in Star Wars, since its very beginning. Steve Sansweet's a treasure. And so go check him out at San Diego Comic-Con on Saturday the 20th. And like I said, tell him RFR sent you.
All right, we've got just a few audio sound bites here from the Josh Horowitz podcast, Happy, Sad, Confused. And it features Daisy Ridley. She's out promoting Ophelia, a new film that she has. And, Jim, you have curated a few of these clips for us.
Yes, I am.
Mark Ramsey coming up, but let's hit a few of these before we go in the cantina.
Yeah, let's knock them out because this is stuff worth hearing. Josh Horowitz, I'm a fan of him and his show Happy, Sad, Confused. He is a hardcore Star Wars fan, and he doesn't back away from a lot of the questions others might be afraid to ask. So the first one is he's talking to Daisy and brings up Star Wars, and they go on about Star Wars for a good chunk of the interview, too. So it's worth checking out. Look up Happy, Sad, Confused with Josh Horowitz. Tell him RFR sent you. Here he is talking to Daisy, and the question comes up that we've asked here on Rebel Force Radio before. What are we to take out of this title, The Rise of Skywalker? Is Skywalker going to be considered the next level of Force user, the next level of Jedi?
Please comment on this, Daisy. The Rise of Skywalker is not about a particular person. Skywalker represents an evolution of the Jedi Order. Care to comment?
Okay. I mean, yeah, that sounds like a great thing. What do you think?
The more I listen to that argument, that makes sense to me.
I mean, and JJ, I think, did sort of say as much, right? He said it represents a lot of different things.
Right.
It's interesting because he told me the title and I was like, oh, because he'd sort of been throwing around things when we were filming. And then he told me when I went to LA and saw just before Chicago, and saw the trailer. And I was like, oh, okay.
So it kind of made sense to you the more you thought about it?
But even John and people were like, oh, I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I was expecting.
Interesting.
And I would agree that it represents a lot of things. Yeah, I don't know. I think it will be one of those things that it's sort of the last few lines of the film and people are like, yeah.
The last few lines of the film. So we might have to wait to the very end before the title makes sense to us.
Right. And I think the last few lines of the film will be Daisy saying, my name is Rey Skywalker. Step aside. Something like that. It's like, oh, I see she's taken the name Skywalker. She's gonna carry the mantle now. So
the mantle.
That's what I think is happening. So they talked a little more about the Rise of Skywalker, and the question was posed to her, is she in a position where she can predict right now, because she's one of the few who actually know the story and is kind of bracing for the release and how that's going to impact fans. And so the question is, can she actually predict right now, prior to the release of Episode 9, what will be happening in that film that makes the fans talk? What will fans be talking about after they see Ep 9?
I can't. I think it's really great. I really do. because you've got Chris Terrio, I'm not kidding, who had like Star Wars Bibles. He was doing his work. Like everything is so linked and it works in the universe and all of the things. Like he did proper nerd homework. Like he dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. I think it's really... It just felt really good doing it. Like JJ said to me, they were doing... I can't remember what it was they were doing. What did he do? Anyway, he was saying that someone was saying, oh, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that, in the grand scheme of things when we were filming, because, you know, we were piecing things together as we went. And he said, if it works in the moment, it will work. And regardless of what you feel as a great story, if it works in a small way, it will be connected in a big way. And the audience, anyway, put themselves into the film. So regardless of how you think people are going to receive it, different people come in with different perspectives, different lives, different stories. And everything we did felt really good. Really, really good.
I see.
Yeah.
Boy, he's in a tough spot. I just would not.
Oh, my God. Well, there's a few things we can take out of those comments, though, that Daisy was making. Daisy had mentioned that the story had changed considerably after she saw the first script from JJ and Chris. And she says that they were kind of, you know, making it up as they went along on set.
Exactly.
Which tells me that there is, and we've heard this from Abrams, too, where he felt more flexibility, more opportunity to test some waters, maybe, when trying to figure out how to wrap up this whole story. And interesting, she says Chris Terrio was really doing his homework with Star Wars Bibles and stuff. Because, Jason, of course, you and me had heard that story years and years and years ago about George Lucas in a writer's room meeting for the Clone Wars, kicking someone out of the meeting because he walked in with a Star Wars essential guide or encyclopedia or something.
Sort of reference book. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and George's line was classic. It was... and this is what we heard. The quote was, "What are you doing with that book? It was written by somebody from Germany." Listen, and that's not a knock on German Star Wars fans. I think a lot of German
not at all.
But I think George was just trying to illustrate the distance of the person who wrote the book compared to where they were standing in that writer's room meeting at that moment. So George didn't want to be shackled by someone else's interpretation of his storytelling.
Yeah, whoever it was standing 3 feet away from the guy who invented it all.
Yeah, right.
And he's going to read some reference guide written by somebody who's probably never met George Lucas.
Right. And for as much as I love a lot of elements of the expanded universe, George always had a chip on his shoulder about other people telling stories about his characters. And he would flat out say, no, Luke never got married. He never hooked up with Mara Jade. George didn't even like Mara Jade for crying out loud.
Oh, he hated that character.
Or Mara Jade, I should call her, not Mara.
Hated that character. That Seth Green did a parody about it.
As the creator of Mara Jade...
Wait! I am not the creator of Mara Jade, and I want you to get out of this office right now.
I'm sorry, Sam.
No way.
You brought it on yourself.
I don't want you here.
So yeah, George, no fan of other people taking liberties with his storytelling, but yet Daisy Ridley considers that to be a virtue for Chris Terrio because he was doing his homework. And I think there's positives and negatives that you can take out of all of that too. So, I mean, we've heard the story about Rian Johnson was sitting in the lobby at Lucasfilm waiting to go in and see someone for an early meeting about Episode 8, and he just randomly grabbed some book, and that book, it was like the Jedi Code or something, and that book laid out the idea of
force projection.
That's it. That's what it was. Force projection. I was going to say force teleportation. Force projection. That was laid out to him in the book. And, I mean, that was just him killing time for a few minutes in the waiting room. And that actually had a huge impact on where the story from Episode 8
was. I mean, he's in a waiting room. He might as well have pulled it from a highlights magazine. All of a sudden, he's like, oh, that'll work.
You know, Goofus and Gallant take on the First Order. So, so Daisy Ridley, anyone who's had to wait in the
So I was waiting for my root canal, and I saw this highlights magazine.
Exactly. I mean, it's essentially that. But hey, the Force works in mysterious ways. So
it sure does.
The conversation with Daisy continues. Josh Horowitz asked the question. Well, he doesn't ask. The conversation sort of leads into the place about a big showdown between Rey and Kylo, and Daisy felt comfortable enough to start talking about their big climactic duel that they're going to have because of the fact that there has been some photographic evidence of that duel released through official channels. So Daisy talks and hints about her duel with Kylo Ren in The Rise of Skywalker.
We have a great fight. And I was really happy that the Vanity Fair pictures did show a bit of it.
Yeah.
It's a great fight. Like, I've become such a better fighter. And they made the lightsabers lighter. So, it actually looks like we're swinging light and not, like, heavy.
Have you seen a cut of that at all? Have you seen a little bit of what that looks like?
I have.
Because,
I have.
The scene with you in Last Jedi is one of my favorites of all the saga films.
Yeah.
If this compares to that one, I'm in.
That felt pretty cool. And also, that was really hard because everything had to match up. The amount of times we did, there's like a dolly shot coming through, and then it ends with me, and I think I was fighting James at the time, who's a stuntman with the two swords.
Mm-hmm.
It was so tiring. We did like 25 takes because if one thing was off, we had to keep going. But I was like really proud of that fight. This fight we did, it was November. We had water being thrown at us. And I got a great deal of respect because I was like, I'm not going to complain about the cold. I'm just not going to do it. So it was like a real thing of stamina. And it just feels really epic. And it felt epic even at the time. So I thought, well, imagine, we had the waves like this. And then they're going to make the waves, I'm sure, bigger. So one can only imagine what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. I got an issue with this, though. She's talking about how the lightsabers seem really light.
Mm.
And George Lucas had been on record many times talking about how he wanted the lightsabers to feel heavy. And that's why they had two-fisted grips.
Right. And you notice
in the original trilogy.
Yes, in the original trilogy. That's
and even going into Rebels, and Dave Filoni was the guy when it came to Rebels. There's a moment when Sabine is being trained to use a lightsaber, and she's surprised at how heavy it is. And
yeah, but that's that's that Mandalorian saber, Am I right about that? Weren't they training her with that?
No. I think they trained her with. I thought they trained her with a real lightsaber.
Yeah,
she's wielding a real lightsaber.
Right.
But the point being that now I know that the highly acrobatic stuff that we saw in the prequels, could potentially give, throw some evidence towards these being lighter. But then again, we're talking about a time when these people were much, much closer to the Force. It was much more part of their daily life. And so the more they advanced in their belief and use of the Force, the lighter these things might have seemed to them. But you notice in Kylo Ren in the sequel trilogy, I mean, he's swinging that thing around like it's like Excalibur, very heavy.
Mm-hmm. I get that, yeah.
So like almost like there's resistance. So we'll see. I mean, some of the haters have really gone after the duel in Episode 8. As much as I have issues with Episode 8, I don't really find the fight there in Snoke's quarters to be anything but pretty thrilling, actually. I think it's pretty fun to watch.
Yeah.
But I'm not a stunt guy. I'm not a swordsman. I'm not, somebody who... I'm not even an athlete. So I can't really speak to it. But just as a layman watching the movie, I'm like, oh, that was cool.
Mm-hmm.
And people have dissected it and said, this doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense.
You could do that with... You can do that with every Star Wars duel that there is. Have you ever tried watching the Yoda Count Dooku duel from Episode 2, frame by frame in slow motion?
Boy, it's hard. It's real hard to follow it.
Well, but you'll notice some weird stuff. It's like, their sabers didn't connect at all right there. There have always been questions I've asked myself about that duel. And as thrilling as it was to be in that movie theater on opening night in 2002 when Yoda pulled back his robe and did a force pull on his saber and held it and ignited it, the whole theater lit up. I mean, everyone went crazy. But then the subsequent duel was, I believe Roger Ebert put it best when he said, watching the film in a typical analog projection, non-digital, you are looking at a little green blob flying around the screen. It's just nondescript.
Yeah.
You can't even wrap your head around what's happening. And Rob Coleman was out doing all these victory laps and stuff. And quite honestly, to this day, I felt that duel between Yoda and Dooku, it feels rushed. It feels awkward. It feels completely without any foundation in reality or like gravity. I mean, it all just feels like, a mess. It's a mess. Watch it frame by frame, and you will see there are moments. That moment when Yoda and Dooku, they connect their sabers and they start talking to each other, and Yoda confirms, you've gone to the dark side. I can sense it. Well, maybe the red saber that he's swinging at you might have tipped you off there, Yoda. But so Yoda's like, fall into the dark side you have, and they're talking. Right before they connect and go into that little moment of dialogue, it's almost like their sabers kind of bend. The blades almost like bend to connect. And it's just like, God, you guys... We're really going through all of this stuff frame by frame, and it lacks that whole saber duel between Yoda and Dooku. And I don't think I've really talked about it in any great detail on the show because I know a lot of people love Episode 2, and so I'm always trying to be a little careful about that. But this is technical stuff, okay? This is special effects, and I just never, ever, ever liked that saber duel between Yoda and Dooku in Ep 2. And it was one of the most exciting moments of the whole film right before it happened. Then after it happened...
I'm so easy to please in some ways because I like that. Now, how do you feel about Palpatine and Yoda in Episode 3?
Again, there are wonky moments there.
Boy, I love that.
Especially when they're brawling in the office before they go up into the Senate Rotunda. Because that stuff is amazing, and I think that's just great stuff, flawless. And I like how Yoda is more going one-on-one in a duel fashion with Palpatine as opposed to all that spinning around he's doing in Episode 2.
Right.
I just felt like that was so ineffective. It's a much better duel, Yoda versus Palpatine. But, again, take it slow-mo. Take it frame by frame, especially when they're down in that office. You're going to notice some wonky stuff happening there. That's like, oh, wow, there's no connection there. Like there'll be a bright flash on the screen, and you'll be like, Yoda's saber was nowhere close to Palpatine's at that moment. There's a couple of little tiny moments there.
Well,
and I can
that's
point
what they're
them out.
doing. But that's exactly what they're doing with this Episode 8 duel. So to your point, I don't think that what was happening in Episode 8 was any more or any less than what you're able to point out in some of these others.
You're talking about that YouTube video where the stuntmen break down the
well, that's just the latest.
But that's the one I saw. The other thing is that the one thing about Episode 8 in that duel that's weird is, in the stuntmen breakdown of the duel, they do point out that those Praetorian guards spin 360s an awful lot for no effective reason whatsoever other than to give the heroes time to reset and strike a blow at them before they're ready. So the Praetorian Guard spinning around a lot is it's good looking, it's great choreography, it's pretty. But as far as it being like, martial arts or swordplay or what have you, it's extremely an ineffective technique that does nothing. I mean, it's almost like watching an ice skater spin around. It's pretty much just to look at. And then there's the case of the Praetorian Guard who has a weapon in both hands, and he's fighting with Rey. And he has a clear open shot to stab her with the other weapon, but mysteriously that weapon had disappeared in post-production. I mean, you see him holding two swords. You don't see him drop the other sword. It just disappears.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there's a personal preference or dislike I have of the Rey Praetorian Guard fight with Kylo is how Rey acts. When she's fighting, she just like these yells that she does. It's just like, yeah! It's like she's front row at a Kiss concert or something. I don't know. And I felt like that kind of aggressiveness was off-putting to her character. We never saw her yell like the battle cry like she does, It's the intimidating Rey, which I don't feel is consistent with her character. She's always been a little more cool. Rey to me is, she's always been kind of a little more cool than that. So if you watch it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Just watch that one part. She yells at the Praetorian. Yeah! It's like, whoa. Whoa!
All right, last clip here of Daisy Ridley, and then we're going to go in the cantina.
Yes. Okay, so this is just kind of interesting. Of course, she doesn't really shine too much detail, but and top marks to Josh Horowitz for asking Daisy this question. Does she know what Colin Trevorrow's story for episode 9 would have been? Daisy reveals that she actually met up with Colin Trevorrow and sat down with him after a premiere of Murder on the Orient Express. And here's what happened.
We have a great fight. Great fight.
Damn it, fat fingers.
We went for dinner afterwards, after the premiere or something. We were all in the hotel. And Colin sat next to me. And I was like, what's this going to be like?
Yeah.
It was, because all I had heard, I didn't know what had happened. I just knew that he wasn't doing it anymore. And he did sort of tell me, and sort of not. And it was fine. And
it's an awkward situation for him, too, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, he sort of told me, but...
Different way, a much different kind of a tale?
Yeah.
Safe to say.
Yeah. And actually, no, we had gone for dinner and stuff. We went for dinner with Michelle, who was a producer, and... so I sort of knew... I think everything happens for a reason.
Well, that's easy to say. Yeah, the reason is that Colin got pissed off that Lucasfilm didn't like his story. That's the reason. And I assume the Michelle who was with them at dinner is Michelle Rejwan, who is now the chief vice president in charge of Star Wars content.
I've been corrected. I believe the way we have to pronounce this is Raywan.
Oh, Raywan.
Raywan. So the J is silent.
All right. Well, okay. Well,
and you get that.
We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Raywan. Raywan.
Well, let's Ray wander into the cantina here. As we said earlier, we promised Mark Ramsey bringing us this incredible Inside Star Wars podcast. It's a mini-series, 8 episodes, but he has also been the producer and the writer for other podcasts exploring the making of famous films, such as The Exorcist, Jaws, and now here he is with Star Wars. So let's just let's get in the cantina. Let's pour some blue milk or whatever else we got going on.
Star Wars Cantina.
Where are you going, Master?
For a drink. Sorry about the mess. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
Hello.
Hello, Mark.
Hey.
Hi, you're on with Rebel Force Radio.
Hey, happy to be here.
Oh boy, what a pleasure it is to talk to you. I've been I've been binging Inside Star Wars, and I got to be honest,
too.
as well as Jimmy Mack, I've never binged a podcast before, and as a 13-year podcaster, but I mean, this whole genre of, and we want to get into the nitty-gritty about your podcast in particular, but this genre of audio documentary is really fascinating. Now, my wife is way into all of the true crime stuff, and so she was kind of in on that early. And I'll be honest, I thought, who listens to an audio doc? How interesting can an audio documentary be? But, I should know, doing this long enough and working with Jimmy Mack long enough, that you can really create and paint incredible pictures in the mind with just audio. How did you get involved in this particular type of audio production?
Well, first of all, I guess it depends on your definition, because I don't really see it as audio documentary. I see it more as audio movie. To me, the documentary aspects are very much secondary to the story. And I set out to tell a compelling story about the people who were involved in making one of the greatest movies of all time, and what they went through, and their ordeals, and their arc, and their growth, and their demise, and their tragedies, as well as their successes. That's really what it was about. I think one of the things that people come to it not understanding is, in fact, they expect it to be pure documentary. And they come to it and say, well, okay, I'm waiting for Lucas to talk, I'm waiting for Hamill to talk, I'm waiting for Carrie to talk. Where is it? And the answer is, when you watch a movie and Leonardo DiCaprio is playing Howard Hughes, the first question isn't, where's Howard Hughes?
Right. Well, I think it's a testament to the quality of what you have put out, that not for 1 second was I sitting there actually waiting. In fact, every time there is, for lack of a better term, a character or historical figure that appears in the piece, it just works. It just fits. I never for once, it never pulled me out of it, expecting to hear George Lucas's voice or Mark Hamill's voice. I just think it's so well stitched together. But let's back up a little bit and introduce you to the Rebel Force Radio audience, those that might not be familiar with you. You've been in this whole game of new media and emerging media for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working for years in the audio space with broadcasters, commercial and public, with folks outside of the audio space, or at least who used to be outside of the audio space, like Apple and EA Sports and others. And I saw this podcasting thing come along, so I went to my production partner on all of these Inside series. His name is Jeff Schmidt. He's fabulous. And I said, Jeff, I feel like no one knows how to do audio anymore. Like they've literally forgotten the art of audio. It's kind of a lost art.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that?
By that I mean the power to use audio to move people. Radio long ago figured out that you could do what we're doing now, and put guys behind mics and have a conversation. It could be very compelling. But that's different from using the full scope of audio, the full cinematic scope of audio, to actually move people, make them happy, make them sad, bring them joy, bring them tears. I mean, that's the best aspect of a television series or a film, is that they move you. And that's what we wanted to do with this more than anything. And we thought the stories were really apropos. I mean, the story of George Lucas going from, the kid who could never be accepted to and worked on cars until he had a near-fatal accident, and then struggled, convinced his father that film school had nothing to do with film and it was some kind of art, to the point where he gets a job, working for Francis Ford Coppola at a time when no one cared about film students. Film students were not people you hired. And then he had this crazy idea for Star Wars, which was uniformly believed as crazy. You guys said you were binging it. Did you get through all the way through the series?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
then you know that it's got it. I mean, there's the last episode has a nice bow on it.
It sure does, and a
I
very
won't
personal
specify
one
what that
too.
is.
I don't want to
Yeah,
spoil it, but I was really touched by the very personal touch you put on the final moment of the final episode, and at the same time bringing the whole thing full circle.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you bring that up, and I think we can touch on it without, spoiling it per se. But what I would say is, almost no one who is a fan of Star Wars today remembers what it was like, if they were even alive, to sit in a theater in 1977 and see that thing flow over them for the very first time. People just don't remember what it was like if they were there at all. Most people in your audience probably got their first exposure to Star Wars on VHS or on HBO or on broadcast.
We skew pretty much to an older demographic. I mean, let's face it. I was there in 1977 as an 8-year-old, and I think we attract a lot of people who want to hear these stories, much like your show, Mark, Inside Star Wars. I think the main attraction to the younger audience who wasn't there to experience it is to hear what it was like.
That's right. And that was the thing, because even those of us who were there forget. I mean, I said to somebody not that long ago, I said, do you think that when Luke is cruising down the trench to kill the Death Star, if you think at that moment, if he had not turned away the computer and instead had, used the computer to fire that last missile to destroy that thing, you think we'd still be talking about Star Wars today? And he said to me, no. And I said, people forget that. I mean, that moment, obviously nobody forgets, but I think people forget what it symbolizes, which is that was the moment when everyone in the audience was reminded, every kid in the audience was reminded that everything you need is within you, that you can do anything you want if you set your mind to it and if you trust yourself. And that was a message people hadn't heard before then, because as George Lucas famously said, there are no more fairy tales. And that's why he created Star Wars.
Yeah. That is so true. And let me just expand on that for a second with you, Mark. Do you think that the whole idea of the Force might be kind of a crutch in that aspect? It kind of, just the idea of the Force might be removing some of that human element from the turn off your targeting computer and trust your instincts.
I think it's kind of the opposite, which is to me, and God knows I've spent a lot of time looking into this for this first picture in the franchise. Mm-hmm. To me, it is the personalization of your instincts. It is the tangible manifestation of your instincts. It has less to do with the God out there and more to do with the God inside. And that is, I think, a message that kids in particular,
without getting too deep,
really need to hear.
Where do you stand on midi-chlorians?
Well, I had that in the series, as you know, and look, George spent a lot of time reconstructing his classics, right? And I think we can all agree that not all of that reconstructing was something that we would prefer. I think we can also all agree that it's his to do with whatever he damn well pleases. And if he felt it wasn't done, he felt it wasn't done right the first time, he gets to play around with it. And you know what? I look, you guys are creative people who make something. I'm a creative person who makes something. There's nothing I like less than to be told that the way I did it should have been done differently, even though it was precisely the way I set out to do it. You know, and that's, I think that's an important thing that people need to understand. And then also, I think people need to check themselves before they criticize him for all these changes and recognize that had it not been for all the pain he went under at a time when all of us were too young to care about it, we wouldn't have this today. None of this would exist today. This entire empire, no pun intended, would not exist today if not for him. And I think for that reason we should you know, kind of like your grandfather who's getting a little weird in his old age. You give him some slack because he's old.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Can I say
yeah.
something else, too, that I really want to
Please.
focus on? And it should have been really clear to you guys listening to the thing. And that is that while George Lucas is the star of the series, Carrie is really the heart. Carrie Fisher is the heart. And the last thing I wrote in the series was the last days of Carrie Fisher. I saved that for last because I knew it would be hard to write, it would be hard to do, and I also knew it would be hard to hear. But I thought it was important, and I thought the way that moved into the recognition of Carrie as an icon was also important because I think we've forgotten that too. We haven't forgotten that Carrie's gone. We haven't forgotten that we miss Carrie. But I think we forgot that, you can go to a women's march today and you'll see women hoisting signs with images of Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia on those signs.
And you know what, Mark, is something that I found, to me, being someone who loved Carrie Fisher and Princess Leia, is the unflinching way you provide an audio recreation of her last moments on board that airplane when right before she slipped into unresponsiveness and then eventually died several days later. It was actually a moment that made me pause and just stand still and listen.
Yeah.
And it affected me emotionally and on a personal level as someone who has always been a fan of Carrie's and, of course, a real appreciation of her character, Princess Leia. So I found it amazing that you didn't hold back at that moment. And more than just commenting on it, though, you kind of painted a picture of what it was like to be in that cabin, sitting next to her as she lived her final moments.
That's the thing. I mean, that's the goal. That's why this is not documentary. This is an audio movie. This is trying to paint a picture in a way, because, if you can't see it and you can't imagine yourself being there and you can't feel it, you can't be moved by it. And if you can't be moved by it, it's not drama, right? It's just a story. And we really wanted to tell this in a way that made an impact on people. And that's been true of this entire series. It was true of our previous series when we did Inside Jaws, we did Inside The Exorcist, we did Inside Psycho. I mean, that's what we've been trying to do throughout is paint those pictures. So I'm glad it had that impact. And also, I think it's important. It wasn't just taking you through the last days of Carrie. As you know, it was kind of putting it in a context, having George Lucas himself put it in a context of what Carrie means to us all. And also, I think it's worth reminding everybody that this woman got into this game reluctantly. She got into this with a lot of things stacked against her. Her parenting was not her parents were not the best. They didn't set her up for success. And the life she led did not set her up to be, healthy. And so finally, when she passed, that didn't in any way take away from her what she had contributed to culture and what she had contributed to women. I mean, I think, again, this is 1977, and the person who's in charge of the entire Rebel Alliance is a woman.
Yeah, and it didn't matter.
No, it didn't matter. It was not. There was nothing made of the fact that she was a woman, right?
Exactly.
And there was a moment in your series, Inside Star Wars, where George is kind of struggling with Carrie, and this is all through audio reenactment and or recreation or reconstruction of the events based on your research. There's a moment when Carrie is very reluctant to do that swing over the chasm And she's talking about all kind of things and very stressed about the whole thing. And it's a real throwaway line that you throw in there. But George responds to her and goes, "Don't worry about it, Carrie. You kick ass." And I loved hearing that. I loved to hear that motivation that George was, and that confidence building that George was giving Carrie, who was a very young actress and, quite honestly, rather inexperienced. You know, I mean, outside of the Warren Beatty movie Shampoo, Carrie wasn't exactly a veteran of the soundstage herself, and she had a lot of confidence issues, let's just say.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there was an insecurity that ran through her, I think, really through most of her life, though she was so boisterous. She was one of those introverted extroverts, I guess you might say.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. She, and that's not unusual for actors, right? But it was certainly true in spades for her, in large part because she was so young, because she had the parentage that she had from Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, and she lived all of her life in the spotlight. That's the other thing that I think people forget. This is someone who lived from the moment she was born. She lived in the spotlight, and she died in the spotlight. And I think as time goes by, I think one of the things right now people are talking about, well, why doesn't she have a star on the Walk of Fame? And obviously we know Mark Hamill's been strongly in favor of that, and there are reasons why, because the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce says you have to, you can't get a star within 5 years of your passing. And even after that, your family has to want one. I have to believe that Billie Lourd wants a star for her mother.
Oh, yeah, that'll happen. I'm sure that'll happen.
I'll tell you something. If ever there was anybody for whom an exception should be made by the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce,
yes,
it is Carrie Fisher.
Why
and
not?
I really feel, we've all walked down that Walk of Fame, right? We see lots of names we don't care about, names we wish we didn't know.
Yeah, right.
One name we don't see is Carrie Fisher, and it's a small thing, but, wouldn't it be great if at the time of the final chapter of the Skywalker franchise, the Skywalker saga, if that could be the time when she gets that star? And I know people say Hollywood Chamber of Commerce they don't want emails, they don't want letters, they don't want Mark Hamill knocking on their door. These are their rules. They don't make exceptions. To that I say baloney. If there's a reason to make an exception, make an exception. And this is something, in my opinion, they should make an exception for. And now's the time they should do it.
Right on.
Mark, you were talking about the art of audio. And what I find so interesting is that the story in some ways really begins with a young George Lucas sitting in front of his the radio in his home as a young boy, listening to Buck Rogers
and Flash Gordon.
And they're creating drama on the radio with just audio is like you say, it's a lost art. What impact did those stories and in that medium you think have on George that he carried into the visual medium?
The thing that radio in those days was great about was sparking the imagination. That's something very much we're trying to do with this series. If you listen to the old radio shows, you'll hear that many of them were kind of ham-handed. Many of them were kind of good in hindsight more than, they did. A lot of it just doesn't live up to today's standards. That's one of the reasons why we did so much in the horror space, quite frankly. Why we took on Psycho and Exorcist and things like that, because I think the ability of audio in and of itself to scare people is second to none. So I think, though, that the idea of a family sitting around staring at a box with no image moving is something completely foreign to pretty much everyone who's alive today. And yet that was what it was like in the very earliest days of his life until he discovered television. And I think it allowed his imagination to roam. And that's one of the things that's largely been lost to audio. Thanks to podcasting, it's beginning to come back, which I'm thrilled about.
Yes.
But this idea that, audio has to be a certain thing. Audio can't be cinematic. That you have to tell everything. You can't leave things to the imagination. I mean, there are pieces of this story. One of my favorite parts of this series is when Carrie's brother Todd calls his mother, Debbie Reynolds, to tell her that Carrie has passed. And what you'll remember about that moment is there's no Debbie Reynolds in it. Right. It's Todd talking over the phone to his mother, who picks up the phone, and she doesn't answer. You don't need to hear her voice. You don't need to see her face. Her lack of words says everything. And that's why that moment's so powerful. And another one like it is...
Your producer, Jeff, put a great finality to that conversation, too, with the simple addition of the phone hitting the receiver. Click.
That's right. That was scripted. Yeah, that was scripted. So, but you're absolutely right, yes. And then the other moment that's kind of like that for me is the Peter Cushing story.
Oh, my God. I wasn't expecting that. That's really when, in my opinion as a listener... And I don't know, I don't want to spoil it too much for people who are going to listen to it, but it's heartbreaking, the story of love and relationship that Peter Cushing went through, and more so is the way it's presented in the podcast. It's
I
very
hope
effective.
So. I mean, I've known that story for a long time. I've wanted to tell that story, and I've been looking for a reason to tell it.
Where'd you find it? Where did you find him? Is it in a book or an interview he gave? Where did you? I mean, I don't need you to say specifically, but
well, I've heard that story before over the years. It's pretty well established, pretty well published, and also it is in one of his memoirs, the memoir he wrote about Hammer.
Got it.
And I'm a big Hammer fan, and have seen all those movies, and he's in half of those movies. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With Christopher Lee, and he's and anything you know about Peter Cushing is that he is one of the finest actors ever. If you look at the effortless way in which he does everything,
very natural.
It is uncanny. And what most people didn't realize is that he had he lost his wife in, I think it was 1974. He lost her to, I can't remember what the disease was now, but to a fatal illness. And he ran up and, when she died, he ran up and down. She died at home. He woke up in the morning and she essentially let out her last breath. This was the love of his life. He spent the next few hours running up and down the stairs in the hopes that he would have a heart attack, because he so wanted to be with her. I mean, that's heavy stuff, and that's a true story. And I think if you look at his history, you'll see that it didn't take long for him to age dramatically. And I said this in the series, that all of a sudden Hammer had to recast all his roles from father to grandfather because he had aged so much in the couple of years since his wife Helen's passing. And 1977 or 76, when the shooting of Star Wars, was right in that period, about 2 years after Peter Cushing's wife Helen had died. And every day he would ride his bike somewhere during the shooting of the film. And people kept wondering, where's Peter going every single day? He's riding his bike. Well, he was going to visit her grave every day during the shooting of Star Wars in London. And I just think things like that are stories which humanize these people. These are not cardboard characters. These are not just actors on the screen. These are human beings, all of them. And the more you humanize them, the more you're able to see yourself in them in you. And that makes you love them more. That's the thing.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, Mark, because, Star Wars is so much about heroes. We tend to, as young fans growing up, we tend to link inextricably the actors with the characters, and you're pretty unflinching. You talk about, in the last episode, a story about Kenny Baker and a child that he essentially gave up. And what gave you the, for lack of a better word, the courage to kind of give this warts and all look at these people, but somehow it still doesn't diminish their contribution and their importance to this?
Great question, and the answer is that's the whole point. That people exist with warts. You know, our greatest heroes are the flawed heroes. Our greatest heroes are the flawed heroes. In fact, their flaws make them more attractive because they make them more human. We have trouble with Superman because he has no flaws.
Yeah, he's tough to write.
Except, guess what? He does have a flaw, and it's called kryptonite, right? So even in Superman's case, there's a flaw. And I think what I'm trying to say is, you know, these are not, like people say, well, George Lucas, he has all the money in the world, right? If you think George Lucas is a happy man because he's got all the money in the world, then you don't know anything about George Lucas.
We just talked about that in an episode a couple weeks ago where Mark Hamill was talking about the big presentation of Galaxy's Edge, the big opening ceremonies. And, you know, it's so funny to hear him talk about it. He's like, here's George, he's worth billions of dollars, and he walks out on stage with Bob Iger, and he's like, well, this could have been a real disaster, but it wasn't, you know. And he says he's still the same guy that we were trying to cheer up back in 1976.
Yeah, he's a sad sack. He's a sad sack. But, you know, whatever it was, the combination of, you know, drive, ambition, craziness, and imagination, that we owe Star Wars to that. And I think that and even Lucas isn't perfect by any stretch. I mean, you know, his obsession with control is almost you know, it's clearly an obsession. But I think that, again, these flaws that color people are what make them interesting. You know, Hamill got on me because in the episode that you know, one of my favorite episodes was the audition episode. I hope you guys enjoyed that. All these young actors auditioning for Star Wars was just tremendous fun.
And you know what's really interesting is, and we brought this up earlier, is you made a point of focusing in on the fact that Freddy Krueger actually had an influence on Mark Hamill's introduction to Star Wars.
Yes, the scene is that Robert comes back from an audition for Coppola's film Apocalypse Now, and Hamill's asleep on his couch. And so he wakes up Hamill to tell him that there's this other thing that would be perfect for him, this role in this thing called Star Wars, and, you know, Lucas is shooting it, etc. And that's Hamill's clue that there's an opportunity. And Hamill says, no, I'm in 8 is enough. And you know, I'm already doing 8 is enough. And I have Englund saying something like, you know, you don't want to be Dick Van Patten's bitch. Come on. This is... And you know what's? But here's what's funny. That was the only episode that Hamill took issue with me, because I get this Twitter storm from Mark Hamill, and you know, anytime the great Mark Hamill criticizes you, you pay attention. That's and right. he said, you made me sound like I was homeless. To which I said, look. I said, first of all, Mark, you're not denying you spent the night on his couch, number one. I said, secondly, last time I checked, having been a young person at one point in my life, you do not need to be homeless to be spending the night on your buddy's couch. That is just a fact I think you guys would agree with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, we actually talked to Robert Englund about that. And I believe that does he say that they were roommates at the time?
No, I think he just infers that Mark was just crashing.
Yeah, no, Mark was crashing there. And Mark said to me, I had a place. It was a nice place. It was at the beach. My agent also told me about the role. Robert wasn't the only one. And I said, Mark, I'm trying to create. This is a movie, for God's sake. This is not a documentary. I'm trying to create with vibrant colors. And he wrote back. He said, "Well, I thought maybe you'd like your colors to be more accurate." I said, "Since when have accurate colors been interesting colors?" And the story is much better
Even when George Lucas tells the story about the history of Star Wars, he switches up a whole bunch of stuff. So.
Oh, believe me, guys, I didn't even rewatch the director's commentary because I knew there would be nothing accurate in it, okay? I just knew it would be so tainted by history that. But the Hamill thing is just funny. My friend,
that is really
my
funny.
production partner Jeff said to me, he said, interesting that he didn't complain about the snoring.
Because it sounds just like me snoring.
The snoring is a nice touch. Again, Jeff, the producer, really stepping it up.
Oh, yeah.
Mark, you talk about so many people in this thing. At first, I thought this was really going to be inside Star Wars from the perspective of George Lucas. But as the story unfolds, more and more characters come into prominence, whether it be for the majority of a whole episode or just for a few minutes. And I noticed that you did include a lot of references to certain behind-the-scenes players. Ben Burt gets his time in the spotlight. Yeah. John Dykstra is focused on. But one guy that you really left out was Gary Kurtz. And is it because his story wasn't really anything too compelling, or is there another reason?
I'm glad you asked that, because there were, Gary was probably the biggest intentional slight in the series. Gary, and the other one was Marcia, Lucas's wife at the time. And there are a couple reasons. The biggest reason is that, let's take Marcia first, who was an editor on the film, and many people credit her with, being instrumental in making the battle sequences so compelling. Marcia's kind of an extension of George. And I thought, the story of George and Marcia together isn't as interesting as the story of George alone. Just like when you watch movies, you realize, well, wait a minute. They just telescoped 5 wives into one for this movie, for this biopic. That kind of stuff happens. The Gary Kurtz story was that Gary Kurtz was also kind of an extension of George Lucas. And it's like, to me, anything that Gary did would be better if George had done it.
Okay. For the story purpose.
For story purposes, Gary was kind of a mini George. Or, I realize he was instrumental in the success of the film, and I hope he's not listening to this, and I'm sorry, Gary, if you are. But
Gary's not around with us anymore.
Oh, Gary's passed? Oh, yeah. Thank God. No offense. I don't mean thank God. I just mean what a shame.
He's not there to create a Twitter storm for you, Mark. As you have said, I mean, even the creator himself, George Lucas, has in some ways conflated the history of Star Wars, and perhaps, I mean, you would know as a film buff and historian, there's probably no film that has been better documented in terms of the making of it, etc., than Star Wars. One, what did you think that you could add to this? And two, how did you go about picking and choosing the version of the story that you wanted to tell?
Well, I in terms of what I thought I could add, I mean, remember, we've been through this a few times. We did Inside Psycho, we did Inside The Exorcist, we did Inside Jaws, and we brought something, I hope, new to each of those stories. I mean, Inside Jaws, the last one we did, the one we did last year, was really kind of a story of becoming Steven Spielberg. That's what that audio movie was. And in this case, I knew that I wasn't dealing with a character quite like Spielberg. I knew Lucas was a more difficult kind of personality to get a handle on. But I found his unrelenting enthusiasm compelling. And the fact that this fantastic thing, Spielberg has gone on to many fantastic things, but this is the most fantastic thing anyone attaches to Lucas, Star Wars and its progeny, right? Mm-hmm. So I thought this is kind of a different type of story in that regard. So I thought, first of all, by dramatizing it, that no one had really ever done that before. No one's told the George Lucas story from, inception to today. Also, I think that I knew there were stories of the people surrounding the film that were compelling, that were interesting. I think the Harrison Ford stories were good, and I like to think I captured Harrison's tone in addition to his action in this. He was portrayed in a very Harrison Fordish way. Alec Guinness was just, somebody said to me, well, I've decided that Alec Guinness is an ass. And I said, no. I said, you don't understand. If you had spent your life making films in theater and you had been celebrated for the classics that you were in, and you had won awards for the great performances you had given, and then for the last 30 years of your life, all anyone associated you with was this movie where you rolled around in the sand with kids in Jawa costumes, you'd be irritated too,
Well, not that irritated. His house got really big after that, I think.
See, but again,
moved up into,
you're falling into the trap. Yes, what did he call it? The lovely bread is what he called it. Yes, the lovely bread.
The lovely bread. But of course, he was cut from a different cloth. And he was just doing something that intrigued him at the time, though he fully didn't understand it, and the popularity of which had never been seen before. And it hit everyone involved like a freight train.
Yes.
Nobody
he never really quite embraced it, did he?
No, I don't think he did. I think he had a lot of faith in George Lucas himself. I think there was something about Lucas's personality and his ambition that was it made Alec Guinness believe in him. But even, I think, through the whole process, he didn't know what was going on. He was somehow, though, yet very convincing in his portrayal of his character. I mean,
absolutely.
And he was worked out. There was a lot of happy mistakes with Star Wars.
Oh, sure, absolutely, as there always are in these circumstances, right? I mean, I'm reminded of when I think of Alec Guinness, I'm reminded of the famous Michael Caine quote about Jaws 4, where someone asked him about the movie, and he said, "I haven't," and he's in Jaws 4. Yeah. And he said, I haven't seen Jaws 4, but I have seen the house that it bought, and the house is beautiful.
Yeah, I loved it. I remember an interview with Michael Caine, Roger Ebert did, and he said, well, what about Jaws 4? And he just said, they can't all be hits, Roger.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mark, I think I know what you set out to accomplish with Inside Star Wars, but I'd like to hear it from yourself. What was it that you really wanted to achieve with this specific topic in this specific podcast?
Well, there were a couple. I'm glad you asked, because there were a couple things. One is I wanted to remind people why they fell in love with the franchise in the first place, because I think it is, there's a lot of sniping right now about all things Star Wars. And I just thought it was worth reminding people that once upon a time, there was a movie we could all agree on in a galaxy far, far away. Also, I wanted to tell, I wanted to tell the Carrie Fisher story. I wanted to really paint that picture with vivid colors. And I think I wanted to remind people also of the like we said earlier, the theme of the original Star Wars, which again gets kind of lost over the years, and relate it to what George Lucas is going through right now with his young children. I mean, the kids have to depend on themselves at a certain point in time. They have to figure things out. They have to find themselves. They have to, slay their dragon, and they have to destroy their Death Star. And that power resides in each of us. And I thought that was kind of a nice way to put a bow on the series and really make people feel good about not just inside Star Wars, but the movie itself and their relationship with it over the course of 40 some odd years. I thought that was really important.
Yeah, and your personal touch really adds to the entire thing. I mean, there's so many different very cold approaches that could have been taken toward this subject matter, but through and through, I hear your voice telling the story, especially now that I've been talking to you for a little while. And something I wanted to bring up to you is this amazing moment I had listening to your show when you referred to the Peter Cushing story.
Mm-hmm.
Again, very heartbreaking and very emotional part of your series. And he actually tries to induce a heart attack after he loses the love of his life so he can join her. And it didn't happen, thankfully. I mean,
right.
No one should ever consider.
He did try. It just didn't work.
But I mean, it's a very passive attempt at suicide.
Yes.
You're
right.
I mean, it's just almost like you put things in the Lord's hands at that point. However, when Carrie passed away, and her mother, Hollywood legend Debbie Reynolds, went away the next day.
Yeah.
You can only assume that the medical explanation for her death is heartbreak. Mm-hmm. And Peter Cushing was dealing with the same thing. So, again, there's these connections between these personal stories with the people who made Star Wars. And then it all comes together at the end there with the Carrie and Debbie thing. It just made me think of Peter and what he was going through. And then I applied that to Debbie. And you did just, what a fabulous job. What a great job of really expanding the podcast medium and finding its potential. I mean, really making it live up to what its true audio potential is. It's an audio medium we work in, and I find it so refreshing, Mark, that you approach it without restraint. And that's something that's so important that a lot of people have asked me about podcasting, if I could give them advice on podcasting and stuff. And a lot of times I think the best advice I could give anyone is know your medium. We work in an audio field. It's oral. It's we have to make the most of the sound. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think you really did bring that to the forefront with Inside Star Wars.
I hope so. I appreciate that so much. And I think I would also add to that advice that you would give, use the Force. I mean, follow your passion. And I hate it when people say, well, should I start up? Everybody tells me I should start a podcast. What does that even mean? I mean, nobody should ever do anything, right? The point is that if there's something in you that has to come out, and that's the best way for it to come, let it come out that way. That's the best advice I can imagine. And I think I really tried to, what I tried to do in this, what we tried to do in all the series, in fact, is have a theme there that's bigger than the sum of its parts, a theme that's bigger than even Star Wars in this case. And in this particular project, I was really trying to communicate, what do you do when you have to say goodbye to this thing that's been your life for 40 years? What's next for you? What, are you happy? And the way again, as I wrote when I write this and when I perform this, I'm really trying to put myself in the position of the people I'm portraying and writing. And in the George Lucas case, that's why I wrote the scenes of him watching his 6-year-old daughter on the swing, because the quote unquote interview with George Lucas was in the context of that episode, and it's only an hour, and it opens the series and it closes the series, and at the end of that series, he goes back home with his daughter. He turns back home, and that phrase, "he turns back home," is really the theme I was trying to convey. That when Star Wars ends, when the greatest things you achieve in your entire career are over, you still come back to family.
Or Taco Bell. All right, you have to listen to the show. You have to listen to the show to get what I just said, right?
He does go to Taco Bell.
Direct reference.
That's factual, by the way.
It is. Okay, well, I love Taco Bell too. Hey, before we have something kind of fun I want to jump into with you before we let you go. But before we get into that, I just want to ask you one quick question about Inside Jaws. I remember it was just a year and a half ago you guys launched that show?
Only about a year ago.
A year ago, and I remember, I'll admit I haven't listened to it yet, but after listening to Inside Star Wars, I'm going to be checking out a lot of stuff you've done, especially Inside Jaws, Jaws being one of my all-time favorite movies. I recall, and I didn't do any Googling about this, but I recall there was something about your show that had connections with a missing person mystery and Stephen King's son. Am I going down the right path here, or what's happening with Inside Jaws?
Yes, much to my chagrin and frustration, the biggest publicity the show got was for a 3-minute segment of one episode where a good friend of mine, who is also a friend of Joe Hill, Stephen King's, who also known as Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, the famed author, the guy who wrote Nosferatu and other things. He said, "Have you heard that Joe Hill has a thing he wrote about a murder on the set of Jaws?" And I said, "No, I haven't heard that. I'm not done with the show yet. Let me know more about it and I'll fit it in." So he sent me a couple links to Joe's stuff. He's a friend of Joe Hill's. And I went and I looked at it. So I wrote in a sequence in the series on that. All of a sudden, that's all anybody wants to talk about, is the true crime. Somehow they found the true crime in Jaws, and they ran with it. Then I really have to feel sorry for Joe Hill, because I get a call from the publicist, and they say, "We want you for the Today Show, you and Joe Hill." And I said, "You want me to fly out to New York to be on the Today Show with Joe Hill for a 3-minute segment of Inside Star Wars, which has everything to do with Inside Jaws, which has everything to do with Joe Hill and nothing to do with me?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "I can't do that." So Joe Hill went on the Today Show without me. That's the way I like to say it anyway. And did great. But the funny thing is that, he was just like, I had to tell my friend, "Please tell Joe how sorry I am that every newspaper and news organization in the world is now calling him about this story that he wrote like 5 years ago, all because of Inside Jaws." So my apologies, Joe. If you're listening, Joe, I'm sorry, and I love Nosferatu. So.
All right, so if you can, Mark, really quickly, just kind of give us a boilerplate version of what the thing is that Joe was writing about, and then you included it in Inside Jaws, and it opened up this whole missing person mystery discussion.
My story about Joe is much more interesting than the actual murder. That's the funny part. It was just like parts of a body were found on the beach, and they didn't know who it was. And Joe had this theory that if you go to a certain part of Jaws, you can see someone who matches the description of the parts of the body that were found based on the clothing and the hair and so on. And it wasn't a shark kill. We're talking about a murder.
Right.
And so Joe said, if we can find out who this woman is in this scene of Jaws, then we'll be able to solve the murder.
And it was just a background extra, right?
Just a background actor. I mean, even that background actor, whoever it is, presuming that she's not dead now, has not come forward to say, "Hey, everybody, it's me and I'm fine." So and no one knows who it is. And it's just one of those mysteries that people love to get intrigued by, that they just find addictive to follow,
Wow. I'm going to have
good
to
for
do some
you.
Googling on
Inside
that.
Jaws got a bunch of pub for it. And as a fellow podcaster, I was looking at that going, I wonder what kind of murder mysteries we can incorporate into Rebel Force Radio. It seems to work.
Believe me, guys. I mean, that was my first thought. I went to my same friend and I said, "Do you know about any murders on the set of Star Wars?"
Now, have you considered doing a podcast series about this murder mystery?
You know what? True crime in general doesn't much interest me. I know that they're just incredibly addicting and people love them, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're at the top of the charts for a reason. I'm just more interested in telling, stories that are broader and have more human appeal, I guess. And when we're working on a few things going forward, we've got a project called The Undercover's about DEA agents, undercover DEA agents. That comes out in October. That's narrated by Ed O'Neill from Modern Family.
Yeah. Nice. Al Bundy. Come on.
Yep,
Modern Family,
that's him.
nothing. That's Al Bundy.
I'm going to be with him in a couple days. And we've got
Sweet.
Another project that we're trying to sell right now. We have a pilot done that's fully scripted. It's written by Sarah Wayne Callies from The Walking Dead, and it stars Jeffrey Dean Morgan and David Harbour. So we got to be in studio with
Chief Hopper.
Yes, and who, by the way, we did a Skype thing with him when we did his studio session for the first episode, and I was running lines with him, and he was obsessed by how much hair everybody had, and my only thought was, if that's the only thing I have that you don't have, I guess I'll consider myself fortunate.
Hey, whatever works for you there, Mark. This could be a Wookiee, I mean, and that's coming, when is that going to drop? So you have The Undercovers hosted by Ed O'Neill. And
that's right. We've got, Fear is something different. Fear is something we're developing right now. The project I mentioned is called Aftershock, and that's selling right now.
Aftershock, yes.
And Fear is a horror project, anthology project, Twilight Zone style, and we're trying to get that sold right now. So, it's just like film and television. At any given point, you're either in production, done with production, or developing.
Well, good for you, man. You're keeping busy, and that is awesome. And if you keep putting out stuff of the quality of Inside Star Wars, then people are in for a real treat when it comes to things like The Undercovers and Aftershock. That's going to be great stuff.
We hope so.
I have to ask, Mark, are there any stories left in the galaxy far, far away that would perhaps bring you back to Star Wars as a subject matter for future podcasts?
I don't think, not this way, not told this way. This is a very, we didn't do Psycho 2. We didn't do Jaws 2.
Right.
We didn't do Exorcist 2. and we're not doing, we're not doing Star Wars 5.
Right.
So I think it would not this way. I think we set out to tell a really human story about human beings, and the fact that it was in the presence of the making of the movie was kind of an excuse to tell the story, if that makes sense. The story is really about the people more so than the movie. And I think that's challenged people's expectations to a degree, because you go to a thing called Inside Star Wars, you expect to get Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Alec Guinness, everybody talking, and or archival footage thereof. And in this case, you don't get any of that. In fact, it's not a documentary at all, and I think people have trouble getting their heads around that sometime. But I think if you come to it expecting a cinematic story told the way, a story would be told around a campfire, then you're going to come away appreciating what we're doing. And so right now I don't foresee that kind of a story coming around again, but you know what? Look at the plethora of stories in the Star Wars universe. Could we conceivably tell a fully scripted story that takes place in the Star Wars universe at some point in the future? You bet we could.
How about any other movies? Are there any others that are kind of pulling at you? Obviously, you've done Psycho, Exorcist, Jaws, and Star Wars. Are there any others out there that might have a good story to tell? Maybe an Apocalypse Now with Francis Ford Coppola? There's a great story behind that.
I'll tell you what's tough is that once you do Star Wars, it's hard to top yourself. And now that we've done 4 seasons, actually more than 4, we actually did 2 episodes on the movie Philadelphia for the 25th anniversary of that movie in order to support the fight against AIDS. And that was fascinating because it didn't get a lot of attention, but it was for Coke, and Coke loved it. And we had to go to the extra effort that we haven't had to go through with any of these other projects to get sign-off from the studio, from the screenwriter, from the filmmaker, and from the stars. So it's the only podcast I know of that got Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington to give it to give it their stamp of approval. So nice. I'll take that.
Well done. Well done.
But the answer to your question is, I don't know right now. I'm thinking that whatever we do going forward is going to have to take a left or a right turn from here. As I said, the projects that we've got, in our arsenal right now that we're working on are all somewhat different from the Inside series. So we'll see where we go. I'm still very much a big fan of biography, and I like that area. And there are certainly, characters in culture, pop culture, and film and television culture, which I find to be really interesting. So we may go down that path. I think we'll have to see.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Well, so Inside Star Wars might be your mic drop moment for the Inside series altogether. And what a great mic drop moment it is, because to me, it really exposes more than anything, more than the story about what went behind Star Wars and its creation, it really kind of exposes you and what Star Wars, the impact Star Wars had on you is not just a creative person, but just in your lifestyle in general. It comes through loud and clear in this, Mark.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because there's a personal story in the series. And then at the same time, obviously I wrote all the characters. I wrote all the dialogue. Some of that is quotations that they actually said, and quite a bit of it isn't. So, you bring yourself to the characters and you bring them to you. That's the way it works. And that's what's so exciting and so fun about it. And that's another way to make them human, because if you just had to know George Lucas from the things he says in interviews, well, that's a pretty shallow, even if you compile them all, it's still a pretty shallow view of what George Lucas is all about. So, yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. That was very much the intention, to make it personal like that. And, honestly, guys, I don't know about you. You were there in 1977. I remember where I sat in the theater.
Yep.
I remember, and all of the things that you probably related to them, because all the things I described in that moment, in that final scene, were actually the things I was thinking and feeling. I did see the people move forward in their chairs. I did question, what the heck is that on the screen? And, wow, these things are moving so fast. I'm used to that, that 2001, when I was a real small kid, my dad brought me to 2001, A Space Odyssey. I have no idea to this day what that movie was about.
Well, a lot of people have seen it many times, are still trying to break that sucker down. I mean, Kubrick definitely left it open to interpretation in a massive, profound way. But I'm with you, Mark. I'm with you. I remember where I was in 1977 when my dad took me to the Eden's Theater on Skokie Boulevard in the north suburbs of Chicago, and we sat there and watched a movie. And midway through, my dad goes, "Hey, well, what's the name of that guy?" And he's pointing at the villain in black, and I go, "Oh, that's Death Invader," because I really thought that was his name. I didn't.
I like that name, Death Invader. I like that.
Death Invader. That's how I interpreted it.
And you know what? That's one of the few things not trademarked by Disney. Death Invader.
Oh, really? I might have to start my own spin-off series. But Death Invader, and I'll never forget my dad. He was, I can tell you, he was sitting to my left, and he elbowed me after I said that, and he goes, "Geez, you sure know a lot about this stuff." Death Invader. Fail.
Mark, we have a couple more quick questions that we want to ask you. We've sort of revived a tradition that we've had going back many years on the podcast, back when people still remembered Inside the Actor Studio, another inside type show. And at the end of each episode, the host would ask these series of questions, and we decided to kind of put a Star Wars spin on it. So this is what we like to ask a lot of our guests, those who meet the criteria, and you certainly meet the criteria.
This is the Yoda questionnaire, Mark. These questions were composed and comprised and collected by Jedi Master Yoda himself. I mean, there wasn't much to do on Dagobah when you're just sitting here and put together a questionnaire.
For 25 years. Okay, and I won't do it in the Yoda syntax. We'll translate for you, make it simpler. What is your favorite line in Star Wars? Your favorite Star Wars line?
I have to say, these are not the droids you're looking for.
Why? Why is that your favorite line? What makes that more impactful to you, Mark Ramsey, than "May the Force be with you"?
Yeah, well, "May the Force be with you" is more than a line, right? But these are not the droids you're looking for. It's not so much the line; it's the way the stormtrooper responds to that line. Because we've all had those moments where we wish we could, where we're in a pickle, right? We're in a dilemma.
Yeah.
And we wish, you get stopped by the officer. You're going a little too fast. And you just want to roll down that window and say, "I'm not the driver you're looking for," and have him say, "Case closed."
So great.
That's
so
a great answer.
it's more than the words and the composition of the quote itself. It's about the impact.
It's about the impact. That's right.
Yes, I like it.
Well, and I believe it's the very first time we see actual Jedi power. If you don't count the crate dragon call.
Oh, good,
that
Jason.
Obi-Wan
Very
does.
well done.
So,
that's true.
What Star Wars moment makes you smile, Mark? Every time you see it, it doesn't matter how many times, it always puts a smile on your face.
I would have to say the awards ceremony at the end of episode 4.
Beautiful.
It's just that and as you guys know, there were only a few things that Lucas had in his mind from the very beginning, and an awards ceremony at the end was one of them.
Triumphant.
Yeah, it doesn't get more symbolic than that.
You leave the theater without question as to who sits on top of the hill.
You're on top of the world. Little did you know it would go on for the rest of your natural life.
All right, now is there a moment in Star Wars that makes you sad? What puts a tear in the corner of Mark's eye? He watches any of the Star Wars films.
Any of the Star Wars films.
Yeah, we're going to open it all up.
I don't like Luke losing his hand. I got to be honest. That's just cold.
It kind of sucked. Yeah,
that's just cold.
Yeah. All right.
No, I think I'd have to say, I you know what? I know everyone kind of, looks down their nose at Return of the Jedi a little bit.
How dare you? I don't.
But I really don't. And I thought that was just kind of the perfect, the pre-Hayden Christensen ending now, kind of the perfect ending. I just thought that was the ending we'd been waiting for.
It was a perfect ending. Yeah. I mean, sometimes criticized for wrapping up everything with a perfect bow. But on the other side of the coin, I heard Mark Hamill himself say, why should we unravel all of that by coming back into episodes 7, 8, and 9? So
listen, that guy has never slept on Robert Englund's couch. You can't believe a word he said.
And he never snores.
Never snored.
Right. All right. You know what? I got through 3 of the 8 episodes. Jim's been through all of them. I can't wait to hear the Peter Cushing stuff. So that'll be great for my commute tomorrow. But so far, I have not got a sense of who your favorite Star Wars character is. So which Star Wars character is your favorite?
I think Solo is the one we want to be, and Luke is the one we are.
Right.
Yeah, right. That is true. Except Solo, he's not Luke.
Or maybe I should say Solo is the one George wants to be, and Luke is the one George is.
Yeah. George is wormy. George is wormy Skywalker there on. Okay, and what about a least favorite? Is there a least favorite character that you come on screen and you're like, oh, jeez.
I could do. Well, let's just talk about the original film.
Okay.
Because otherwise it's too easy. I could do. I could do without Jabba the Hutt. I could do without Greedo. But again, one thing I want everybody to understand is that, and I want people to understand this for the new movies too, by the way. It's that before you're ready to pounce on these new films for not being true to whatever your vision is of what the universe should be, Recognize that the people who are making these things, first of all, are really talented people. They're doing their very best, and more than anything, they want to please you. And then once you digest all of that, then go to town. But at least acknowledge that. These are not vanity projects for any of these people. No one puts the keys to the Star Wars franchise in anyone's hands and says, do anything you want.
It's hard to envision that sometimes when you look at some of the recent decisions made. But I'm willing to concede the point that nobody sets out to make a bad Star Wars movie.
Well, they're trying to make too many.
Star Wars movie. Yeah,
they're trying to do
Star Wars
too
movie
many. That's the issue.
That ticks off fans.
Yeah.
You're right. Because that's just being stupid with your money and your investment.
Right.
There are a lot of jobs in the Star Wars universe. I mean, you think about all the different career choices within universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
From Jedi Knight to the guys that fire the Death Star super weapon there.
And there's got to be dudes working gas stations at Tatooine too. Let's not leave them out.
Sure. You even got bartenders. You got Wur, the bartender.
Everything doesn't have to be military based.
That's true.
Right.
That is true. So what job would you have, Mark, in the Star Wars universe?
Well, none of these jobs, I'll tell you, none of these jobs on these planets look any good at all to me. I got to say.
No, pretty miserable. Yeah.
They're pretty much uniformly awful jobs. I definitely don't want to work for Peter Cushing because that's just, a den of vipers. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to work close to Billy Lord, whatever Billy's doing. I'll do with her,
Lord fan club.
Because I think we just have a lot to talk about, and we'd be able to cover each other's asses pretty well. That would be so. Whatever Billy's into, I'm into.
All right.
Okay, the Billy Lord fan club. Now, are you a big fan of her character in the sequels, Lieutenant Connix?
I'm glad she's in them, and I'd like to work with her there. And I can't say I'm a big fan of her in the sequels because she's not the most prominent of characters, but I kind of like that about it too. I'd like to stay just off stage for most of the film.
Okay, all right. Okay. So off stage with Billy Lord.
Her of course, her character's full name, as we know, is Lieutenant Harry Connix Jr.
That's not it. Don't listen to him.
All right. Finally, last question, Mark. If you found out that George Lucas was going to direct one more Star Wars movie, and he cast you in it. So, Mark, you're in George Lucas's last Star Wars movie. What would you like him to say to you after he says cut on your last scene?
I don't know what I'd like him to say to me. I know what he would say to me, which is, listen, smartass, you realize every one of your scenes is going to be on the cutting room floor. Thanks for Inside Star Wars.
Oh, vengeance is sweet. That's what you call Revenge of the Sith right there.
Right. Oh, man. Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. You got to get over to Wondery.com. That's WONDERY.com and check out Inside Star Wars. Everyone that's listening to this podcast has to just go right now, subscribe. It's 7 episodes, 8, I believe, right? If you count the introduction.
By the time this
teaser
actually more than that. By the time this airs, we have a bonus episode with Brian J. Jones, who wrote the biography of Lucas called George Lucas: A Life, and we're talking to him this week. So there's actually 8 episodes in total, plus the opening teaser, and you can find them all at InsideStarWars.com.
Oh, even easier. InsideStarWars.com.
Wherever you get podcasts.
Just go there.
There was also a very interesting trailer for, it sounds like an entirely different show, Star Wars Cinema Technology on American Innovations. Is that what we're talking about? That's it. American Innovations.
Yeah, that's a different show, and they since they were doing a similar, a related topic, they dropped a few minutes of their episode.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, that's how you guys do it, huh? You just
That's how we
drop
do
in
it.
those little trailers and you suck people in. Okay, well, that's cool. I love it. I love it. We're on board. So Inside Star Wars, check it out. Wandery.com. You can find it on iTunes and wherever you find podcasts. Where you find us, you will find Inside Star Wars. And I can't recommend it enough. It's a great binge listen. And now all 7 episodes are there. And you can knock it all out just as fast as I did. And it's such a good time, too.
Good. I'm so glad you liked it. Thank you guys for listening and for having me on. It's a real joy. You guys, you have a great show. Congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
And everybody who's listening, I certainly understand why, because you guys do a great job.
Thank you, Mark. Please stay in touch.
Thank you.
Please.
Will do.
Yes.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Mark Ramsey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Rebel Force Radio.
We at Lucasfilm, we understand the franchise better than anybody else. We know how to make, market, and license these films. We need to keep Lucasfilm intact. We need to retain some control. George, if Disney owns Lucasfilm, Disney calls all the shots. All the final say is ours, not yours. You're going to have to surrender control.
Fred?
No, thanks.
Rebel Force Radio.